AITA for kicking out my best friend who is also my housemate because she wasn't paying her share of the bills and rent. I 26 female have been living with my best friend, Kayla to 5F, for about a year now. We've known each other since high school, so when we both ended up moving to the same city for work, it felt like a no-brainer to share an apartment. We were thrilled to finally live together after all those years of dreaming about it. For a while, it was great. We'd have movie nights, cook together, and even throw the occasional small party. It felt like everything had fallen perfectly into place. When we signed the lease, we made a clear agreement to split the rent and utilities 50-50ths. We're both working, though our jobs don't pay much. I work in a relatively stable office job, and Kayla was bartending, which meant her income fluctuated a bit, but she always managed to get by. Things were smooth for the first few months, but around spring, Kayla started running into some financial trouble. I noticed she was a little quieter than usual and seemed stressed. She'd mentioned how work had been slow and how she was struggling to make ends meet, so when she asked if she could be late on rent for a month, I said it was no problem. After all, she's my best friend, and I figured it was just a temporary hiccup. But then, 1 month turned into 2, turned into 3. She'd pay me bits and pieces when she could, but it was never the full amount, and I was covering the rest to make sure our rent and bills were paid on time. I knew she was going through a rough patch, and I didn't want to add to her stress, so I tried to be understanding. We had a few conversations where I gently asked her if she was okay and reminded her that I needed her to pay her share when she could. Each time, she'd tell me she was really sorry and that things would get better soon. She always made it seem like she had a plan to fix things, and I wanted to believe her. Around the 4th month of me carrying the bulk of the financial load, I started to feel the strain. My own savings were dwindling, and I had to start cutting back on my own spending just to make sure everything was covered. I was picking up extra hours at work, eating cheaper meals, and saying no to outings I would have loved to go on, also I could keep up with the rent and utilities. I didn't want to confront Kayla too harshly because I knew she was struggling, but it was starting to wear me down. Every time we'd talk about it, she'd tell me how she was looking for a better job or trying to pick up extra shifts, and I'd nod and hope that things would improve. One night, we had a long conversation where I told her that I understood she was in a tough spot, but I couldn't keep covering for her indefinitely. I asked her to be honest with me about her finances and to tell me if she needed more help finding a solution. Kayla said she was embarrassed and felt like a failure, which broke my heart. She promised she was doing everything she could to sort things out and that she'd catch up on the payments as soon as she could. I believed her because she's my best friend, and I know she doesn't want to take advantage of me. But then, weeks turned into months, and nothing changed. Rent would be due, and she'd always have an excuse for why she couldn't pay her share that time. I tried suggesting she look for a roommate to sublet her room, or even get a part-time job to help make ends meet, but she'd brush it off, saying she didn't want to live with a stranger or that it would be too difficult to juggle 2 jobs. It was like she wasn't even considering other options, and that's when I started to feel like I was being taken advantage of. I mean, I get it, life is hard, and sometimes we all need a little help. But I was drowning trying to keep up with everything on my own, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this up. About a month ago, I finally snapped. I'd just gotten paid, and almost my entire paycheck went straight to covering the rent and utilities. I had hardly anything left for myself, and it hit me that I couldn't even enjoy the money I'd earned because I was too busy keeping us afloat. I was upset, and when I got home that evening, I told Kayla that we needed to have a serious talk. I laid everything out, how I was struggling to keep up with all the bills, how I'd been eating cheap meals and skipping things I wanted to do just to make sure we didn't fall behind, and how I felt like she wasn't taking any real steps to change her situation. I told her I couldn't keep doing this, and if she couldn't start paying her share consistently, she would need to move out. Kayla got defensive and said she was doing the best she could, but that things hadn't worked out the way she planned. She said I wasn't being fair and that I should understand because we're friends and friends help each other out. That stung, and I told her that I'd been helping her out for months, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my own well-being for her indefinitely. The conversation escalated, and we both said things we didn't mean. She accused me of not being there for her when she needed it most, and I said that I felt like she wasn't even trying to find a solution. Update 1. We ended that night on a really sour note, and honestly, I didn't sleep much. I kept going over our conversation in my head, wondering if I was being too harsh or if I was really doing the right thing. The next morning, I woke up determined to address it again. Kayla seemed to be in a better mood, so I took a deep breath and told her that I didn't want to throw her out on the street, but I also couldn't keep going like this. I said if she could find a way to consistently contribute her share of the rent and utilities, we could work things out and she could stay. Kayla looked relieved and said she just needed a little more time. She asked if I could give her one more month. She promised that she'd really focus on finding a job this time, maybe even a full-time one instead of just bartending, so she could get back on her feet. I wanted to believe her, I really did, so I said yes. I agreed to cover her again for this month, but I made it clear that this was the last time. She thanked me and swore she'd make it up to me. I could see she was sincere, and I felt a bit better about the situation. But the relief was short-lived. The next day, I asked her how the job search was going, expecting to hear that she'd at least updated her resume or started looking at listings online. Instead, she told me she hadn't started yet. She said she needed to clear her head first, maybe spend the day just relaxing, and then she'd be able to focus on the job hunt. I was a bit frustrated, but I let it slide, telling myself that maybe she just needed a day to decompress. The day after that, I came home and asked her again if she'd found anything. Once again, she said no. She mentioned she'd been thinking about what kind of job she wanted, but she hadn't actually applied to anything yet. I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I didn't want to snap at her. I told her that she really needed to start applying soon because time was running out, and she just nodded, saying she'd get on it the next day. Well, the next day came and went, and when I asked her again, it was the same story, nothing. She said she had a headache and didn't feel up to it. On the fourth day, I was starting to lose my cool, and I couldn't help but ask her why she wasn't taking this seriously. She got defensive again, saying she was tired and that she needed a bit of a mental break before diving into job hunting. She kept insisting that she'd find something, that she just needed a bit more time. I knew that looking for a job could be exhausting and disheartening, but at this point, I was starting to feel like she was avoiding it altogether. After about a week and a half, it was clear that Kayla hadn't made any real progress on her job search. I would ask her how it was going, and she'd either dodge the question or give me vague answers about how she was still looking for the right opportunity. I was really struggling to understand how someone who was so desperate to stay could be so casual about finding a way to make it happen. It was like she was just waiting for something to magically work out without putting in any effort, and I couldn't wrap my head around that. Halfway through the month, I decided to take matters into my own hands a bit. I started looking up job listings myself. I found a few positions that I thought could be a good fit for her, retail jobs, entry-level office positions, even a few bartending gigs at places that were actively hiring. I printed out the listings and left them on the kitchen counter for her, hoping it would give her a bit of a head start. When I got home that evening, the papers were still on the counter, untouched. I asked her if she'd had a chance to look at them, and she said she had, but she wasn't interested in those jobs. She said she didn't want to settle for something beneath her and that she was looking for a decent job that she could see herself doing long-term. That really rubbed me the wrong way. Here I was, going out of my way to help her find anything that could bring in some money, and she was turning her nose up at it because it wasn't what she wanted. I tried to stay calm, but I told her that at this point, anything was better than nothing, and she needed to be realistic. Kayla just sighed and said that she didn't want to waste her time on a job that wouldn't make her happy, and that she was still looking for the right fit. I was floored. It felt like we were having two completely different conversations. I was talking about keeping a roof over our heads, and she was talking about job satisfaction. I told her that if she was serious about staying here, she needed to start applying to jobs, any jobs, as soon as possible. She just nodded and said she understood, but there was no sense of urgency, and I left feeling more frustrated than ever. Over the next few days, I kept checking in with her, but it was the same thing over and over. She hadn't started applying yet because she was still thinking about what she wanted to do, or she wasn't feeling well, or she needed to clear her mind. Meanwhile, I was working extra hours to make sure everything was covered, and I could feel the resentment building up inside me. I hated feeling that way toward her, but it was like she didn't even see how much I was struggling to keep everything afloat. I'd go to work exhausted, come home to the same old excuses, and then go to bed worrying about how I was going to keep paying for everything on my own. A couple of weeks into the month, I found out about a part-time position at a local cafe that was hiring immediately. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work, and I figured it could at least get Kayla some income while she figured out her next steps. I came home and told her about it, and she just shrugged and said she wasn't interested. I asked her why, and she said she didn't want to waste her time on something that wasn't a good fit for her. At that moment, I felt like I was going to scream. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to explain that sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do just to get by, but she just kept insisting that she was holding out for something better. I walked away from that conversation feeling more defeated than ever. I felt like I'd tried everything. I'd given her extra time, helped her look for jobs, even tried to find one for her, and she still wasn't taking any of it seriously. It felt like she was living in this bubble where everything would just work out, and she didn't see that it was all falling on me. And the worst part was, I didn't know what to do anymore. I was out of options, and I was starting to think that maybe kicking her out was the only way to get her to take this seriously. Update 2. It was the penultimate day of the month, and I was feeling the pressure more than ever. I'd been counting down the days, hoping that Kayla would surprise me and have some good news to share, but every time I brought up the topic, it was the same excuses. My anxiety was through the roof, and I was barely getting any sleep because I was constantly thinking about what would happen if she didn't find a way to pay. I kept reminding myself that I'd agreed to give her one more month, but I was quickly realizing that this whole arrangement might have been a huge mistake. That evening, I decided to talk to Kayla one more time. I didn't want to have to kick her out, but I needed to know where things stood. I headed toward her room, trying to prepare myself for whatever excuse she was going to give me this time. But when I got to the doorway, I stopped dead in my tracks. Kayla was sitting on her bed, with stacks of cash laid out in front of her. I couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't just a little bit of money, it was a serious amount. My mind was racing, and for a moment, I thought maybe she had found a job and hadn't told me yet. Maybe this was her way of surprising me, but as I stood there, stunned, she looked up and noticed me. I asked her, trying to keep my voice calm, where all the money had come from. She didn't seem fazed at all, and casually told me that her parents had sent it to her. I was even more confused. I didn't know why she hadn't mentioned it before, but I figured this meant she could finally pay her share of the rent and utilities for the month. It felt like a huge weight was about to be lifted off my shoulders, and I could feel a sense of relief washing over me. I told her, half smiling, that since she had the money now, she could go ahead and pay me for her part of the expenses. But instead of agreeing, Kayla just looked at me, genuinely surprised, and said that the money her parents had given her was for her, not for the rent. She said she would pay for her accommodation with the money she earned from a job, once she found one. It took me a moment to process what she was saying. I could feel my heart sink, and the relief I'd felt just seconds ago was quickly turning into frustration and disbelief. I was trying to wrap my head around the fact that she had this money, actual, physical cash, and she wasn't planning to use it to cover her living expenses. It took a moment for me to find my voice, and when I did, I was still holding on to a sliver of hope. I asked her if she had finally found a job, even a part-time one, and she just shrugged and said no. She said she hadn't been able to find a decent job in just a month, as if that was a completely normal thing to admit. She didn't even sound apologetic. It was like she thought I'd be fine with that answer. I was shocked. I stood there, staring at her, trying to comprehend how she could have let the entire month go by without making any progress, and yet, she was still sitting on a pile of money she had no intention of using to pay me back. Kayla's explanation was that her parents had given her this money to make sure she could take care of herself, and that meant keeping it for things she wanted or needed. She said she was going to use it for herself, not to pay the rent, and that she'd figure out a way to pay me once she found a job. But what really floored me was when she added that I should just give her another month to sort things out because we're friends, and friends help each other out. I felt like I was in a bad dream, like none of this could be real. She still hadn't found a job. She was sitting on enough money to cover at least a few months of rent, and she was asking me to just cover for her again like nothing was wrong. I didn't know what to say. I was furious, but I was also hurt. I had tried so hard to be patient, to be supportive, to help her in every way I could. I had covered her share of the bills for months, even though it was putting me under immense financial stress. And yet, here she was, acting like it was no big deal, like I should just keep putting myself in this situation because we were friends. I felt like she was completely disregarding everything I had been going through to keep us both afloat, and I couldn't believe she was still expecting me to do more. I left her room without saying much. I didn't trust myself to keep calm, and I needed to think. I sat in my room, my mind racing, replaying everything that had happened over the last few months. Every excuse, every promise she had made, every time I had covered for her, and now this. I couldn't believe how blind I had been. I had spent months trying to convince myself that she was doing her best, that she just needed a little more time, but it was clear now that she had no real intention of taking responsibility. I was trying to be a good friend, but she was using our friendship as a way to avoid dealing with her problems. The longer I sat there, the angrier I got. I was tired of feeling like I was being taken for granted, tired of stretching myself thin just so she could keep pretending everything was fine. It hurt to think about kicking her out, but I realized that I had to stop letting my emotions dictate what was clearly a bad situation. I couldn't keep letting her walk all over me. It was clear that if she had the money, she could have paid me, but she chose not to. That was a decision she made, and it felt like a slap in the face after everything I had done to support her. I knew what I had to do, but it didn't make it any easier. I kept going over it in my head, thinking about how she'd react, how upset she'd be, but I also kept reminding myself that this wasn't just about me anymore. I was struggling to keep up with my own expenses, and I had been making sacrifices to cover for her, while she was sitting on money that she could have used to ease the burden. I felt like she had completely disregarded everything I was going through, and that was something I couldn't ignore. As the night went on, I made up my mind. If she didn't come up with a way to pay me back by the end of the month, she would have to move out. I had given her chance after chance, and I wasn't going to keep enabling her behavior. I still cared about her, and I didn't want her to end up in a bad situation, but I also needed to take care of myself. If she wasn't willing to take responsibility, I couldn't keep sacrificing my own stability for her. I felt like I was finally seeing the situation for what it was, and as much as it hurt, I knew it was time to make a change. Update 3. The end of the month finally rolled around, and I knew I couldn't keep putting off the conversation that I had been dreading. I had spent the last couple of weeks going back and forth, second-guessing myself, and wondering if I was being too harsh. But every time I thought about how much I had sacrificed to cover for Kayla, and how she had just let me do it without making any real effort to change the situation, I felt more and more justified in what I needed to do. It was time for things to change, and as much as I hated the idea of our friendship ending on such a sour note, I couldn't keep letting her take advantage of me. That evening, I went to her room and found her lounging on her bed, scrolling through her phone without a care in the world. It was the same scene I'd seen so many times over the past month, and it struck a nerve. I had been working extra shifts, stressing about how I was going to make rent, and there she was, acting like everything was fine. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check, and asked her if she had found a job yet. She looked up at me, and I could see the confusion on her face, like she didn't understand why I was even asking. She casually said that, of course, she hadn't found a job. In her mind, it was unreasonable to expect her to have found something decent in just a month. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. It was like she didn't even realize how serious this situation was, how much strain this had put on me. I reminded her that I had agreed to cover her for this month on the condition that she would be looking for a job, but she hadn't made any effort to do so. I told her that she either needed to use the money her parents gave her to pay her share of the rent and utilities, or she would have to leave. For a moment, there was silence. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't believe what I was saying. Then, her expression shifted to shock, almost like she was offended by the suggestion. She told me she couldn't do that she couldn't use the money her parents gave her because it was meant for her, not for rent. She said that I was supposed to be her friend, and friends didn't just kick each other out when things got tough. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had been trying to help her for months, bending over backward to make sure she had a place to stay, and now she was acting like I was the one betraying our friendship. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, and I knew I needed to be clear about how I felt, even if it meant saying things she didn't want to hear. I told her that I was tired of paying for everything while she sat back and did nothing. I was tired of making sacrifices so she could keep living comfortably without any consequences. I said that real friends don't let their friends struggle and stress like I have been, while they have the means to help but choose not to. I told her that she had used me, and that hurt more than anything else. I had tried to be understanding, tried to be supportive, but she had taken advantage of that and had expected me to keep carrying her indefinitely. I could see that she was stunned by my words, but I didn't stop. I needed her to understand just how much this had affected me. I told her that this wasn't about our friendship anymore, it was about respect. Respect for my time, my efforts, and my own financial situation. I had been more than generous, and she had made it clear that she didn't see the problem with expecting me to keep covering for her. I said that I would give her a bit of time to get her things together, but she needed to find another place to live because I couldn't do this anymore. She tried to protest, saying that she just needed more time, that she was still figuring things out, but I shook my head. I had heard it all before, and I wasn't going to let her keep dragging this out. The rest of the conversation was tense and awkward. She kept trying to reason with me, kept bringing up how we were friends and how friends didn't do this to each other, but I couldn't listen to it anymore. I told her that I didn't want to hear any more excuses, and that my decision was final. She was going to have to move out, and that was that. I could tell she was upset, but I didn't know what else to do. I had tried everything to make this work, and she had left me with no other choice. After I left her room, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved, like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't going to have to keep stressing about how to cover the bills or whether Kayla would ever follow through on her promises. But another part of me felt guilty, like I had failed as a friend. I kept thinking back to everything she had said about how friends help each other out, and I started to wonder if maybe I was being too harsh, if maybe I should have given her more time. It was clear that she was struggling, and I didn't want to make things harder for her, but I also couldn't keep sacrificing my own well-being just to make her life easier. Now, I'm stuck in this weird place where I don't know if I made the right choice. I've been replaying everything that happened over the past few months, trying to figure out if there was something else I could have done, some other way I could have helped without feeling so drained and taken advantage of. But every time I think about it, I come back to the same conclusion. I gave her so many chances, so many opportunities to step up and take responsibility, and she didn't. She had the money to pay her share, but she refused to use it because she thought I would just keep covering for her. I needed to take care of myself, and I needed to set boundaries that she kept ignoring. I hate that it's come to this, and I wish things could have turned out differently, but I don't know how much more I could have done to make this work. AITA for kicking her out, even though she's going through a tough time. Did I fail as a friend by not giving her more time, or was I right to finally stand up for myself?